Scrapers, shell companies, and sneaky schemes, we are talking about the fight against modern fraud. From the nitty-gritty of trust and safety to battling those pesky chargebacks, Brian Davis has the inside scoop and tons of experience to walk us through this fun and necessary topic. Brian, I am very excited to have you as a guest on the podcast. You know, but the audience may not know that I'm a huge fan of yours and all of the content that you put out, the things that you've done. And I would say I'm more of a recent fan, but I've been really digging into and loving the things that you're saying about fraud.
I'll take any type of fan. I appreciate you joining along. I really just strive to kind of create these conversations that years ago, even a few years ago, were taboo. So yeah. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on to bring some of the things that I know that you know how to speak to really well, just to the light for people who it's hyper relevant for. And so we're talking about fraud, and there's going to be varying understandings of what fraud looks like in our audience, from earlier stage marketplaces who maybe don't have the experts, the subject matter experts on their team yet that have this in-depth knowledge, to some of them like mid-market marketplaces who may understand a lot better what types of fraud are out there. So I think the best place to start, Brian, would be, could you give us just a 30,000-foot view of what is the current landscape of fraud, not only in marketplaces, but also beyond? What does fraud look like right now compared to the past?
I think that's a fully loaded question. So really what I'm seeing a lot more is fraud is happening faster to companies at, like, it used to kind of wait till you have a little bit of a brand name recognition, maybe a valuable product. Now it's, all right, what pieces of data does a company have? How can I move money? Or how can I just test something on your site to see what I can or can't do? Test my own methods. So the style around how it's really being faced with companies, it's changing a little bit more of sort like that. Kind of just like businesses. There's more businesses. It's easier to create a business. It's easier to scale a business. It's easier to run a business with smaller teams, leaner teams, and be exceptionally good at it. The problem is we see the same thing with fraud. So when I think about like the 30,000 foot view of it, it starts with understanding the risk surface area of what your business may look like. An e-commerce site has a little bit different risk surface area than a marketplace, which has a similar but a slightly different risk surface area to a fintech. So it's about understanding what your user journey really looks like and what the different checkpoints along with that. So things like traffic coming to your site, a new account opening, logins, payments or uploading of money, moving money off platform. Some marketplaces have listings or communication between buyer side, seller side. So it's understanding how do users actually interact with your platform. And that's really where I start to say, like, really, what does fraud look like today? I might not necessarily care about someone irrelevant to me. Now, can I learn something from them? Absolutely. But I want to really kind of focus on what is the risk I face today? Where do I want to grow as a company? And what and how will the risk potentially change as we grow our own brand?
That's good. And so how would you recommend that people start to understand and look into their user journey? Like, is there, this doesn't have to be super long, but I'm just looking for any kind of practical advice you can give on how to get started with that.
Sign up, be a new user, and just go through your onboarding flow. If you have a testing or a sandbox, see if you can access or play around with that depending on what your role is. You might have access, you might not have access. If you don't and can't, then sign up like a new user. What is the friction in place? Is there no friction in place? How do you sign up? What information you have to give? That's one checkpoint, new account opening. Once you get on, try to log in and log out. That's a checkpoint. Can you upload payment details? how do you move money on and off platform. If you signed up as a new user, you might not want to do that, but understanding how you can put money on the platform or move money off platform is important. And if you have different user journeys, like a buyer side and a seller side, or service and fulfillment, or your user journey might be a little bit different of how you onboard or what you ask for those. So if you can go through those flows, it helps you educate of like, if I'm someone who has no idea what my platform is, then what would be frustrating to them? What could a fraudster kind of take advantage of the lack of information we asked for? Or really, how do we get visibility of what's actually happening? So that's the first step of kind of just lay out how a customer interacts with your platform. And on the other end, where I start, or the next step is, all right, what data do we have there? What pieces of information, now me on the other side, internally at the company, can I become visible to? That I can use to start to create a narrative around of, is this user more than likely legitimate, or is this user more than likely risky? And how we want to create those experiences for those different segments.
So what has been your experience with the types of fraud that are prevalent right now in businesses? Like what should leaders be thinking about when they're thinking of fraud risk?
So I'm going to reframe it a little bit. So what I've been seeing a lot in starting like our conversations is companies are coming to me for really one or two problems to start. They recognize they have other problems, but need a starting point to ultimately land to build out the foundation. So it depends kind of on the aptitude of really where they care about. Do they want to care about the front door, the people coming to the platform, or do they want to start with what is happening on the platform? So for example of people coming to the platform, that would be new accounts. Your KYC, your IDV, of understanding who is coming to your platform and should we allow these users to come to this platform, whether it's policy related or whether it's risk and fraud related. There's different ways to kind of segment these users of what the experience is, to learn more about them, to say, I trust you, I don't trust you. And then from those branches, what should be the outcomes? The other one is a little bit more around money movement. The financial risk, it's a little bit easier for companies to say, I know what this is impacting our business, we just follow the money. Whether that's ACH returns, chargebacks, something of the sort like that, refunds. So there's different money trails that companies tend to follow to say, I know what our chargeback rate is, we want to decrease it. Or our chargeback rate's really low, but we're rejecting a lot of good users. We want to accept more transactions. It's not always necessarily about eliminating risk, it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
So usually our start of the conversations are either around the identity of knowing who your customers are, knowing who your fraudsters are, or your behaviors, money movement. Usually tied and followed with those are more core to like the business. Are they a heavy content or listings platform? They might care a little bit more around the user generated content. Are they kind of more like product oriented? They might care a little bit more about logins at this point, or they prioritize their logins, account takeovers, the risk of account takeovers at logins a little bit higher of like that third point. So usually the conversations start at either the front door or in the house and then kind of build out from there.
So I think you started to get into this a little bit, and that explanation is really helpful. What are the differences between the different types of frauds you might experience in different types of companies? So people are coming to you not only in different situations with different concerns, but also just from different types of platforms or different types of businesses. What are the unique challenges and unique types of fraud that are maybe a bit higher volume in some types of businesses versus others?
Yep. Payment fraud, credit card fraud is something we see pretty often, to identity theft or synthetic identities. So now these are, if you take it back to the 30,000 foot view. We mapped out the user journey. We say we have a checkpoint at new accounts, we have a checkpoint at payments. Then we go down to the next level of what are the risks of those. At new accounts, we have identity theft, synthetic identities, or fake accounts. At payments, we have credit card testing, like ACH returns, chargeback fraud, promo abuse, refund abuse. So now we start to break out the different typologies of fraud that can be clustered and associated to that checkpoint. So really from there, that's when we start to build out the strategies themselves. And then as we said, within logins, there's account takeovers, there's bot attacks. So bot attacks being more scripted behaviors to either test logins to see what credentials from data breaches that they have access to these email password combos, what works or what doesn't work. And they can run these against multiple sites to say, confirmed work, let's see where else this can work at other points. So when we go back to like, why is fraud happening sooner? Sometimes it's just to test a data point like that. Does this email password combo work? Yes, no. Now I know this works. Where else can I use this? So it's about understanding where you fall within the fraudster's scam journey. And then that's really where now we start to internally focus on our risks, the identity issues, login issues, generated content, money movement issues. And then we're not having even really touched on like policy and circumventions, which is it's a whole nother area of abuse.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I know in a lot of companies now, there are fraud experts, these subject matter experts. There's fraud teams. There are often trust and safety teams that are tasked with fighting a lot of different kinds of fraud because it's becoming so prevalent. And so as the world has changed, trust and safety didn't even exist as in the way it does now, at least 10 years ago. And so we're building out this piece of our organization, and probably the foundational piece of success in any organization is going to be having really good goals. And so as we're fighting fraud in different ways and with different teams, I'd love to hear about what kind of goals you would expect to see a fraud team, a trust and safety team, or maybe an organization to have if they are dealing with fraud in a healthy way, knowing that beyond these subject matter experts, everyone in the organization has some ownership over fighting fraud. Everyone.
I think we're far away from it, but having a chief trust officer of owning this relationship, not just falling as a like under the umbrella of owned by itself, of actually its important function of realizing the impact of revenue, the impact of security and safety, and not just saying you're reducing costs as a function as a whole. For me, it would be an ultimate goal. Huge win. We got a lot of ways to go from there. In the short term, really what I'm hoping and helping our community kind of drive forward to is raising more voices, internally or externally. So this helps a lot around education and awareness of companies understanding the true value and impact throughout the company as a whole. So usually what I've seen, even in my own career, of like, I keep my head down, I will focus on this work so no one else has to worry about fraud. I'll handle it. By that way, I'll obviously be so valuable to the company, they'll just promote me after promote me. But the problem is no one knows what I'm doing. They say, we know you do something about fraud, and we trust you to do it, but we really have no idea what you're doing. I see this often as well of other people falling into the same trap that I did, of like this heads down expert work without this education piece. Once I started talking more about fraud and investigating less, I know it seems backwards, my career grew faster and faster. So really helping our community be better educators on our own expertise. Because fraud is a foreign language and it's complex, so it gets confusing to people who don't understand. So when a fraud problem happens, and you come to the table as an expert and you're speaking only in the language of fraud, you're going to get a lot of glazed over eyes. It makes you hard to work with. it makes it hard to support your goals because people are just confused of like, I don't really understand it. So it's about breaking down the silos. It's about bringing partners in, and it's about leveling the knowledge gap and bringing people into, so when a problem doesn't arise, I don't have to go over chargebacks 101, payments 101, identity theft 101. People understand that. And then we can actually say what happened, what do me as the expert recommend as a solution, and then how can we work together as partners to actually solve and prioritize the solution. Not say, hey, here's a problem, engineering is going to kick this down 2 months from now, maybe you'll get lucky. So it's about actually being better educators in our space internally.
Yeah, that's good. So because everyone in the organization has to be a fraud fighter, and because fraud teams depend a lot on buy-in from the rest of the organization, a good goal immediately is just to become educated, and for a team to educate your organization on the types of risks and things that are out there so that you can then understand and go and do what you need to do. And I completely agree. I think it's difficult to educate on something when trust and safety and fraud in general just seem like cost centers rather than, like you said earlier, revenue generating pieces of the business, which really they are if you look at it. So I think that's really good. I think if we want to get a little more practical now, I'd love to hear how businesses can start to proactively address fraud, because I think you've hit on this too. We see that the way we deal with fraud is often very reactive, and banning people and things like that happen after some type of fraudulent activity has happened, or after bad actors already in your platform and looking for places to take advantage of you. So how can we be proactively addressing fraud? What are some good first steps, maybe baby steps, for companies that are looking to start?
I don't know if this is a baby step because some people is a huge cultural change, but it's about alignment between fraud goals and company goals. So the way I like to think about it is, who are my stakeholders? I need to work with marketing. I need to work with finance. I need to work with product. I need to work with engineering. What do they care about? And how misaligned are my own goals, OKRs, whatever your company really calls it or grades upon it? How misaligned am I to the rest of the company? I'm not going to align every goal, but if I can find some goals or a goal to start to align better with my partners, now we're incentivized to work together. Instead of being my goal goes against marketing goals, why would they want to partner with me? If their bonus is tied to not doing my work, then doing my work, they might get better data. It might make more sense that we'll clear out less fraud, but they'll get less leads. They'll get less conversions, but it might be cleaner. They're not incentivized like that. So it first starts with alignment of, again, being easy to work with, being a partner, instead of forcing everyone to come into my world as a fraud fighter, because most people naturally aren't going to do that, is how close can I meet them to where they're at, so they have to come less, and then start to kind of work together. And when I can break down those barriers, then it's easier for me to get support from these stakeholders. I need buy-in, that we can kind of look at of like, oh, you're working on this, my work is also tied to this. Now it's a greater epic tied together. Instead of two different projects, it's a bigger epic. Now, instead of fighting for resources, we're just sharing the same resources to solve the same problem. Mm-hmm. So it's like fraudsters don't care who handles what part of a business, but internally, we fight over resources to just put a Band-Aid on one part of the user journey, when holistically, we could be working a little bit better together. So for me, it starts with alignment. It isn't easy. They are hard conversations. It takes a lot of empathizing. It takes a lot of internal investigation of, how does marketing think? How is marketing driven? What are marketing's goals? Why are those marketing goals? And starting to get to those levels, so it's a lot easier to have a conversation and say, hey, I have an idea. And really, that's the momentum to build alignment.
That's great. If you were to look outside of maybe the organizational relationships with fraud and say, on a tactical level, as a fraud expert, you're the one-man fraud expert in the company right now, practical things they might start to do in the beginning.
find ways to engage. People aren't probably going to want to do heavy lifts of reverse shadowing, come into my world, or lunch and learns. It starts with understanding your audience, who your audience is. Again, kind of goes into like the alignment of the goals, like part of knowing your audience is that. But what do they care about? What drives them? Okay, so how do I teach them? How do I bring them in? What are like my expertise? I know my stuff. I know what I want to say. So how do I put that in their world, packaged as a deliverable, and get my valuable message out to them in their own world? So, for example, I've done different things. One company might work at one company, and I tried at another company, and it just doesn't work for my audience. Test and try different things. So I've done lunch and learns. I've done internal newsletters. I've done little videos. Like I've done different ways of like edutainment, if you will, internally to say, how can I connect, be relevant, and educate the company on different fraud problems that we're either facing or different initiatives we will ultimately face. Like, hey, we want to grow into this big brand. Well, this is what they face. I know this because I'm educating of the risk exposure of big brand A that I can bring back and say, what can we put in place today to protect us today? Obviously, I won't get buy-in today. We might not even have this fraud problem today. But how can I plant these seeds so before the fraud problem comes or we start collecting data that there is this fraud problem, that it's a lot, I've removed a lot of objections and obstacles, at least at that starting point. I won't have eliminated everything, but if I can eliminate a couple obstacles and objections at that point, that really has kind of helped me in my career. So know your audience, know your stuff, and then kind of know your message of how you want to package it up and deliver it to your audience.
Right, so we talked in the beginning about the importance of mapping your user journey as a good first step to understanding the potential risks that you have. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's next. So you've got your user journey, maybe seeing a couple of risks. What should they be doing? What are the next steps after that?
So you've mapped out your user journey. Again, these are the different checkpoints. Think the traffic, the new accounts, logins, payments. We've kind of covered that enough today. We started to uncover what are potential fraud risks at each one of those checkpoints. So now the big question is, we might uncover multiple fraud risks or fraud types are occurring on our platform. How do we solve one versus the other? How do we prioritize? How do we even determine we even have a fraud problem to begin with? So, at least in my experience, this isn't the same for everyone. I've always kind of been stuck in a position to either choose what do I want to do? And how can I cover the most surface area of what my day-to-day of what I'm responsible for? And I've been the one-man team of fraud, so I've been responsible for all the different types of fraud on platforms. So I have to kind of say, how will I make my life easier? How will I make myself a better fraud fighter? For me, it starts with crafting a story. Kind of naturally, I'm a storyteller, so I like to bring in the engagement and making it relatable. Business is driven by numbers. So if you just tell a story and you got no numbers, leadership or your stakeholders are probably going to poke holes in your story and it's going to fall flat without some substance or some foundation to stand on, and that's your numbers and your data. So for me, I am starting to get really whatever I can. I'm not super technical of like writing queries. I've learned how to reverse engineer queries. I've learned how to kind of be dangerous, I guess, if you will, with queries, but I'm no expert when it comes to it. So I use those basic skills, either collecting people's queries that they've used and editing them to get what I need, or writing super basic ones just to collect more data that I can kind of play around with in different spreadsheets. So everyone loves spreadsheets. Yeah. And that's really where I start, of really starting to get the foundation to my story of saying, we have an awful ATO problem. Okay, how can I show there's an awful ATO problem? So I'm starting to look at these different data points around these different checkpoints associated to these fraud risks. I think you can kind of see how I'm breaking it down. Each layer we kind of start to go deeper and deeper too. So now I'm on collecting this data. It might be like why I say it's easier for some companies to start payments. You have your chargeback rate. We have this many transactions this month. We had this many chargebacks. The chargebacks were coming from this country on these types of like. I will bring in whatever data I can to help me point in the direction of how do I solve this, and what is taking up more of my time. If I'm at a point where I was lucky enough to have teammates or support, was taking up most of their time. Where are we losing users in the user journey? Too much friction, not enough friction. So I'm kind of looking at not just hard costs, but the soft costs and the overhead costs, and the different attributes of creating the profile around what a risky user looks like and what a legitimate user looks like. And as I'm starting to segment those, that's how I'm starting to build back into my story of the user journey at the checkpoint of a legitimate user compared to the user journey of a fraudulent or abusive user that's taking up my team, eating at our revenue, sucking our marketing costs dry. So I'm starting to build it out that way of how can I show we actually have a chargeback issue? How can I actually show we have an identity theft issue? Depending on what data you collect from users. So like one company might just take email. Another company might take email, name, address, social security, eye color, height, weight. Like the more data you have, the easier it is to kind of create a profile around it versus something you have less data. So it's really hard for me to say every company should do this because they might not have that data point and then it throws everything off. So starting to look at what data are you collecting at those checkpoints and where else can I get data to back this up, that I can support that we do have an identity theft issue and it's costing us X amount of money downstream.
So something we've talked about here a little bit is just you mentioned if I'm lucky enough to have some other people alongside me here, we've talked about how fraud teams are built now. I'd like to hear from you your advice to leaders who are thinking it's time for me to make my first hire or for me to start to plan out a fraud team, address this issue, or a trust and safety team to address this issue, whatever that might be for them at the moment. What would be your recommendations to that company that's looking to put together a team or a process?
I am absolutely biased because I come from the fraud and trust and safety community. I am on the side of hire by building trust by design. So you're building out the products, you're building out the feature, you're building out the experience with product, with marketing, with engineering before it's launched, and then taking over from a fraud by committee. So all the people, CS, operations, product, who got to sprinkle this, sprinkle that, and say, this isn't my job. I want nothing to do with this. Get this off my plate yesterday. I've come into both of those situations. Maybe I'm a little bit crazy. I like both of those because they're different types of chaos that I like to organize the chaos. It is, for me, I feel fraud is a creative department. Marketing is not the only creative department. Fraud, you're starting to solve all these problems. You're trying to think about how people are thinking. There's this psychology aspects into it. So if I can build that into and with people, one, we build better relationships. There's less of a pendulum swing as you're building it into features at launch. So you can collect data as you're launching and testing new features versus we have this fraud problem, we got to put something in, well, that didn't work, roll it back. There's a lot of churn and whiplash when you're going like that. And as the expert, I like the canvas of building what I want, how I want it, and kind of flexing my expertise. Versus you taking over from fraud by committee, all these people had goodwill, good intention, just by accidentally ended up with this. It wasn't even their purpose. That's why they want to get rid of it. They did the best they could, but there's a reason why they don't want to continue with it. There's a reason why they don't want to make their role entirely this. They want to stay within CS, driving the voice of the customer. They want to stay in engineering, building the products. They want to stay in product, building out the whole product as a whole or their function. They want to own the pieces that they're experts in. So when you come into a situation like that, there's a lot of learning, unlearning, and relearning that happens. So sometimes it can be a little bit slower of a start, or you're dealing with politics of, oh, this person decided this and put this in. I wouldn't undo that, because now you're dealing with the whole politics side. So there's a lot of like complexities taking over from fraud by committee. That's the more natural route though, because like most companies, you want to stay lean, you want to stay small, you want to do as much as you can, especially come from the startup environment. You hear we wear a lot of different hats. It's kind of like the badge of honor almost.
Sure.
It leads to these, and it's not just fraud that falls into this. Like the other functions of the business fall to the wayside, and then you start to pick up the pieces that were kind of hodgepodge together. It's not just fraud that I see. So it's not just like singularity of like, oh, woe is me as a fraud fighter. Other functions see this too, and if you want to build it out, build it within. Trust by design.
That's great. So let's start to land the plane here. I got a couple questions that we ask all the guests on the podcast, and I think end up being really helpful for the audience. And the first is just to sum it up. I mean, I think I could just ask you any question about fraud and you would be able to give me just an incredible answer. I just want to start making up questions on the fly because I know it would be really helpful to just get your thoughts on any of them. But
we can definitely do a rapid fire episode.
That would be awesome. We'd love to have you back on too. But just to summarize this, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for marketplace leaders, business leaders to have from all
understand the risk of your platform? And not just the general risk of we might lose money, we might have chargebacks. Understand your user journey and the different checkpoints into them. And what are the risks associated to them? How can they impact your customer experience? It's not just a fraud problem, it's a customer experience problem. So start with, again, mapping your user journey, breaking out the different checkpoints, and then what are the risks of that? A simple 1, 2, 3 step to kind of just be like, do I actually understand my business I'm building or I'm helping build, whatever your role may be, to say, all right, I'm a business leader. I need to think about this holistically. If we want to build, launch new features, what are the risks associated to it? It's not my role as a fraud person to come in and say, we can't launch into a new country. We can't enable instant payouts. We can't do X, Y, Z. It is, all right, let's understand the potential risks of this. What do we have in place to mitigate this or to have visibility on it? And then are we okay with taking that risk? Yes or no? I take a role more as an internal advisor or consultant. When we're launching new features, my goal is to enable revenue. My goal is to enable growth, not hold us back. So it's kind of carrying that narrative of just understand your user journey, understand the risks of your business.
That's great. And last question here, and it's kind of the opposite of that one. Outside of everything that we've talked about, in fact, outside of fraud in general, what advice could you give to marketplace leaders? What would be your one outside of the box idea or piece of advice that you would give to them?
And it doesn't really fall into just fraud as well, but you hire experts purposely, marketing, engineering, fraud. Let them be experts. Give them the support, give them the tools, and let them show off why they're the experts. Let them show off why you hired them in the first place. Don't just hold them back. And I'm not saying blindly give them the keys. Challenge them, question them, but don't just always put them down or brush them off to the side. Make sure they have an understanding of why and how they become the experts, but let them lead as experts within their domain.
That's great. And for the rest of the audience here, we actually did this in a little bit of a reverse order. We usually give an introduction in the beginning, and it's my fault we didn't this time. So I just want to give an intro to you, Brian, and who you are. I mentioned I'm a huge fan. Brian runs the House of Fraud, which is an awesome newsletter. They put out weekly updates. Really, we've talked about in this episode already, the importance of education in this area, and you're doing an incredible job at that. So we'll have the House of Fraud linked in the show notes highly encourage you guys just to go subscribe to the newsletter and just keep up with the stuff he is doing. And also we'll link to LinkedIn, which is where I've been engaging a lot with you, so you can go and follow him there. And so you understand a little bit about his background. He's built multiple fraud teams from scratch, so he's got a lot of experience executing here, and now he's getting a lot of experience teaching in this as well, and doing so while being the head of trust and safety at Dodgeball. So you've got a pretty full world, Brian.
I like to keep myself busy.
Yeah.
Really kind of like where I like the piece of coming in and helping educate. It's kind of been at the core. There's really kind of two pieces that kind of drive me in specific roles. One, educating and teaching about fraud. So that's why like to come in at these earlier stages and be that internal expert. A lot of times they're uphill battles. I know what I'm getting myself into, but I like overcoming that. The other one is when I build out teams, is helping raise voices. I have confidence internally to be, I mean, I wasn't always like this, but today I have confidence of how to speak my mind professionally, of holding my ground and really kind of driving forward our own goals as a team. But I can only take us so far alone, that I want to help raise our community's voices and help them not just feel like the experts, actually be seen as the experts. So it's really kind of those two pieces that go together. That's kind of where the House of Fraud and Dodgeball is where I'm the head of trust and safety fraud orchestration platform. The House of Fraud is more of a community bringing together all different fraud experts to really kind of focus on those two different pieces that kind of ignite my own creativity.
That's great. Well, Brian, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule of already doing your part in education now to come and help our audience get a little more educated as well on this issue. I'm really passionate about it, and you've done an incredible job of opening this up. And like I said, would love to have you back. As we end here, I would really encourage you, audience, to go check the show notes for all of these links to connect with Brian, all the things that he's doing. Highly recommend that. And be looking out, subscribe to Rockin Your Marketplace, because it seems like we may have some future episodes together, more collaboration, which would be awesome. So thank you guys for joining in on this episode, giving us some of your time, and we'll see you guys again soon.